Hello there and welcome back to the Sleep Science. You are hovering at the edge of sleep, eyelids heavy, thoughts loosening their grip, and above you, at least in your imagination, the night sky feels unusually close, like it might lean down and check whether you're actually resting or just pretending. The room around you is quiet, but your mind drifts outward, past ceilings and clouds, into that vast black place where time behaves badly and nothing quite agrees on what now means. Somewhere between your last yawn and the first tug of a dream, you start to wonder whether falling asleep is less like switching off a light and more like stepping into a different coordinate system altogether. You probably won't survive this episode fully awake, and honestly, that's the plan. So before you get comfortable, we'd take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you feel like it, drop a comment with where you're listening from and what the local time is, because time zones are about to get weird. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You stay exactly where you are, but the story begins to move, slow and steady, like the gentle pull of gravity, or the absence of it. You imagine yourself floating, not quite asleep yet, not fully awake either, in that soft in-between state where thoughts stretch and bend. It turns out that this is precisely the state that caught NASA's attention, because sleep, like space-time, refuses to behave in neat straight lines. Here's a solid, mainstream historical fact to anchor you before you drift too far. When humans first began living aboard space stations, especially the International Space Station in the late 1990s, NASA quickly realized astronauts weren't sleeping enough. Official reports showed chronic sleep deprivation, sometimes averaging barely 6 hours a night. That's not a fringe claim or a whispered rumor, it's in the mission logs. Space is cool, but it is apparently terrible for bedtime routines. As you relax, you picture an astronaut closing their eyes while Earth spins silently beneath them every 90 minutes. 16 sunrises and sunsets a day, which is frankly rude if you're trying to maintain a circadian rhythm. Your own brain, safely grounded, evolved to trust that night means sleep and day means wake up. In orbit, and those cues are scrambled like eggs in zero-G. No wonder NASA started asking deeper questions, not just about sleep loss, but about time itself. If time is stretching and squeezing out there, what does that mean for a brain that measures its life in cycles of rest? You breathe slowly, and the idea settles in that sleep is the most time-sensitive thing you do. You don't just sleep anywhere in your schedule, you sleep at a time, and that's where space-time sneaks into the bedroom. Astronauts orbiting Earth experience a tiny but real effect predicted by Einstein: time dilation. Clocks on the space station tick ever so slightly differently than clocks on the ground. It's a difference measured in microseconds. Not enough to ruin a good nap, but enough to matter to physicists and to make sleep researchers raise an eyebrow and whisper, "Son, huh?" There's also a wonderfully quirky tidbit that feels almost too strange to be true, yet is. Astronauts sometimes report seeing flashes of light while their eyes are closed, especially when trying to sleep. These aren't dreams. They're cosmic rays, high-energy particles from deep space, sipping through their eyeballs and setting off neurons like tiny camera flashes. Imagine drifting off and your brain decides to throw a surprise light show. Sleep mask, completely useless. That's space for you. You let that image drift by without grabbing onto it, because tonight isn't about staying alert. It's about letting curiosity soften into calm. NASA's interest in sleep wasn't philosophical at first, it was practical. Tired astronauts make mistakes, but the longer researchers watched sleep unravel in orbit, drowning, the more it began to look like a window into something bigger. Sleep might not just respond to time, it might reveal how the brain experiences time at all. You might chuckle quietly at the thought that your own bedtime struggles suddenly feel very scientific. Can't sleep? Congratulations, you're basically an astronaut now. Joke number 1, gently deployed. Joke number 2 arrives when you imagine mission control saying, "Houston, we have a problem." He hits snooze again. And a third, because balance matters, is the comforting realization that even rocket scientists can't fix insomnia with a clipboard and a countdown. As your thoughts slow, the narration keeps gliding. Historians still argue whether humanity's obsession with sleep and dreams came from staring at the night sky long before telescopes existed, or whether it was simply boredom before electricity. Either way, the link between darkness, rest, and cosmic wonder runs deep. Ancient cultures tracked stars to mark seasons, rituals, and sleep patterns, unknowingly tying their nights to the mechanics of the universe. NASA's modern labs, filled with wires and sensors, are a long way from ancient campfires, but the question hasn't changed much. What happens to the human mind when its usual sense of time is disturbed? In space, time stretches. In sleep, it dissolves. You close your eyes for what feels like seconds and wake up hours later, or you dream an entire lifetime during a short nap. That shared weirdness is what makes scientists lean forward in their chairs. You feel your own sense of time loosening now. Minutes feel less important. The present moment grows soft around the edges. That's exactly the state researchers care about, because it's when the brain stops tracking clocks and starts listening to internal rhythms. NASA didn't just find sleep in space, it found sleep behaving like a quiet experiment in space-time perception. The room remains still, your breathing evens out. The idea gently lands that sleep may be the one place where humans naturally experience something like relativity, time speeding up, slowing down, or vanishing entirely without leaving Earth. And as that thought settles, there's nothing you need to solve, nothing you need to remember. Just drift, knowing that the story will keep watch for you. You don't wake up between sections, you simply drift deeper, as if the story itself is pulling you along like a slow current. Your body stays heavy and still, but your attention floats somewhere above it, listening. Somewhere far away, maybe Houston, maybe your own imagination. NASA scientists are rubbing tired eyes and asking an oddly human question for people surrounded by rockets and equations. Why can't our astronauts sleep properly up here? This is where the curiosity really begins, not with space-time equations or grand cosmic revelations, but with complaints, real ones. Astronauts reported lying awake for hours, feeling exhausted yet oddly alert, as if their brains had missed the memo about bedtime. Some slept in short bursts, others drifted in and out of shallow rest, and almost all of them logged fatigue that lingered day after day. This is the mainstream, the well-documented fact that nudged NASA into action. Sleep deprivation became one of the most consistent physiological issues in spaceflight. You imagine a researcher staring at sleep logs, noticing patterns that don't quite line up. On Earth, bad sleep usually has familiar villains: stress, light, noise, caffeine, that ill-advised late-night scroll. In orbit, those excuses fall apart. The station is controlled, routines are strict, and yet sleep keeps slipping away. That's when NASA began to wonder whether something deeper was being disrupted, something tied not just to habit, but to time itself. As you relax, you picture the absurdity of trying to schedule sleep in a place where night happens every 90 minutes. The International Space Station circles Earth about 16 times a day, 16 mornings, 16 evenings. Why don't your brain evolve to expect one? No wonder it protests. And here comes a gentle joke, barely louder than a whisper. Even your worst jet lag has never tried to reset your body clock 16 times before breakfast. But NASA didn't stop at blaming sunrises. They started measuring brain activity, hormones, body temperature. Melatonin levels, the chemical that tells your body it's time to sleep, turned out to be especially rebellious in orbit. Sometimes it surged too early, sometimes too late, sometimes not at all. The internal clock ticked, but it no longer agreed with the environment. That disagreement is where things get interesting and oddly philosophical. Here's a quirky tidbit that feels like it wandered in from science fiction but didn't. Early space missions experimented with artificial days, adjusting lighting schedules to simulate Earth-like time. Some astronauts still reported feeling out of sync, as if their bodies knew the difference between a fake sunrise and the real thing, even when their eyes couldn't tell. It's like your brain quietly muttering, "Nice try, but I know we're not home." You let that thought drift past, unchallenged, because the story isn't about winning an argument with your brain. It's about listening to it slow down. NASA's insomnia question gradually expanded. If sleep depends on time cues and those cues are distorted in space, what does that say about how the brain measures time internally? Is your sense of now anchored to gravity, to light, to motion? Historians still argue whether early space agencies underestimated sleep simply because they saw it as downtime rather than an active biological process. In the race to reach orbit and the moon, rest was treated like a luxury. Only later did it become clear that sleep is not the absence of work, it's maintenance. Ignore it, and the whole system starts to wobble. You imagine that wobble now, but gently, like a slow rocking rather than turbulence. Astronauts reported mood changes, memory slips, slower reaction times. Nothing dramatic at first, just subtle signs that the mind was losing its usual rhythm. NASA realized that sleep wasn't just being shortened, it was being reshaped. And reshaping time inside the brain starts to feel uncomfortably close to reshaping space-time outside the spacecraft. A second soft joke slides in. Turns out you can escape Earth's gravity, but you still can't escape bedtime. And a third follows, almost a yawn in sentence form. Insomnia is apparently interplanetary. The more you sink into the narration, the more the connection begins to feel intuitive rather than technical. Sleep is the one time each day when your brain stops actively tracking the external world. It turns inward, running on internal clocks and rhythms. In space, the external world behaves differently. Time passes at a slightly altered rate. Light cycles are chaotic. Gravity vanishes. NASA's question becomes less about why astronauts can't sleep and more about what sleep is actually doing. Some researchers began to suspect that sleep is how the brain recalibrates its sense of time. On Earth, that recalibration happens quietly every night, and reinforced by consistent days and nights. In orbit, with those anchors gone, the brain struggles to settle. You can feel a faint echo of that struggle when you travel, when your sleep feels thin and your dreams feel oddly timed. Multiply that feeling by months and float it above the planet. You're not floating, of course. You're safe, grounded, supported by whatever you're lying on. But your mind likes the metaphor. It drifts with it because the story is no longer urgent. NASA's curiosity is patient. It unfolds over years of missions and studies, each one adding a small piece to a much larger puzzle. As your breathing slows, the idea settles in that sleep problems in space weren't a failure. They were a clue, a signpost pointing toward a deeper relationship between biology and physics, higher between the ticking of neurons and the ticking of clocks. And while NASA keeps asking these questions with instruments and data, you get to explore them the easier way. By resting, time softens, the edges blur, and somewhere between a yawn and a dream, the question lingers without demanding an answer. You keep drifting, not falling, just easing forward as if time itself has decided to stop checking its watch. The question now isn't whether sleep changes in space. You already feel that it must. But what happens to the internal clock that tells you when to feel sleepy in the first place? That clock has a name, and it's quietly ticking inside you right now. Your circadian rhythm. On Earth, your circadian clock is a master of routine. It lives deep in your brain, in a tiny region that responds obsessively to light and darkness. Morning light nudges it awake. Evening darkness tells it to slow things down. This is a mainstream, well-established biological fact, discovered through decades of sleep research and confirmed countless times in labs and clinics. You don't consciously control it, which is probably for the best, because you'd forget to reset it immediately. As you rest, you imagine this clock as a gentle conductor, waving its baton to keep hormones, body temperature, alertness, and sleep all playing in time. On Earth, the orchestra mostly behaves. In space, the conductor shows up, looks around, and realizes the musicians are floating away. NASA learned very quickly that the circadian system does not appreciate improvisation. Astronauts aboard the space station experience light in strange, abrupt cycles. Bright artificial light, sudden darkness, and then sunlight slicing through a window at what feels like a random hour. Your brain doesn't know whether to brew coffee or yawn. It tries to adapt, but adaptation takes time, and space doesn't offer much patience. Here's the oddly charming, slightly quirky tidbit. Some astronauts describe their sense of day as emotional rather than visual. Without a reliable sunrise, they start relying on feelings, alertness, hunger, mental sharpness, to guess what time it is. Imagine checking your mood instead of your phone to decide whether it's morning. You smile faintly at the thought, because you've accidentally done that on weekends, haven't you? The circadian clock does attempt to adjust, but it evolved under one very specific condition: a 24-hour Earth day. In orbit, that assumption collapses. NASA tried using carefully programmed lighting systems that change color and intensity throughout the station's day, mimicking sunrise and sunset. It helps, but not perfectly. The brain is stubborn. It likes the original version of reality. You feel a small ripple of humor pass through your thoughts. Joke number one floats by. Your internal clock hates updates and prefers the classic edition. Joke number two follows close behind. Apparently, your brain is the kind of software that crashes when the sun refreshes too often. And the third arrives softly, like a bedtime pun. Even in space, your body still wants to know when it's socially acceptable to wear pajamas. As the narration continues, the story widens just a little. Circadian rhythms don't only affect sleep, they regulate nearly every system in your body. Digestion, immune response, mood, even how efficiently your cells repair themselves. When that rhythm falters, everything feels slightly off-key. Astronauts reported feeling foggy, not dramatically ill, just subtly misaligned, as if their thoughts were arriving a beat late. Historians still argue whether early scientists fully grasped how deeply circadian rhythms shape human behavior, or whether they initially dismissed them as a minor inconvenience rather than a foundational biological force. Only in the last century did the clock inside you gain the respect it deserves. Spaceflight accelerated that realization. When the rhythm breaks, the human system complains. NASA's data revealed something quietly fascinating. Even when astronauts thought they had adapted, their biology sometimes disagreed. Body temperature cycles drifted. Hormone release mistimed itself. And sleep occurred, but not always when it was scheduled. It was as if the body was keeping its own private calendar, refusing to fully synchronize with orbital life. You let that idea drift without resistance. There's no need to solve it tonight, but the connection begins to feel personal. You felt circadian misalignment before? Late nights, early alarms, travel across time zones. That groggy, unreal feeling where hours blur together and sleep doesn't quite refresh you. Space simply magnifies what already happens on Earth. Here's where space-time sneaks back into the room, quietly. Circadian rhythms are, at their core, biological timekeepers. They measure the passage of time not with seconds and minutes, but with cycles. Light and dark, wake and rest. In space, when external time cues fracture, the brain's internal sense of time becomes unstable. That instability echoes something physicists already know. Time isn't absolute. It depends on context, motion, and reference frames. You're not doing equations, and no one expects you to. You just let the idea rest beside you. Your brain, half listening, half dreaming, recognizes a pattern. Sleep, circadian rhythms, and space-time all rely on cycles and consistency. Remove the anchors, and things start to drift. Another gentle observation settles in. Perhaps sleep isn't just scheduled by the circadian clock. Perhaps sleep is how the brain repairs the clock itself. A nightly recalibration, aligning your internal time with the external world. In space, that alignment becomes fuzzy. On Earth, it's easier, especially right now, as you lie still, letting the story carry the weight of thinking for you. NASA continues to refine lighting, schedules, and sleep protocols, but the deeper question lingers beneath the practical fixes. If human biology is so tightly bound to Earth's rotation, what happens when we leave it behind for longer journeys? Months, years. Other planets with different days. Your circadian clock, loyal but inflexible, may face the ultimate test. You don't need to worry about that tonight. For now, your clock is safe. The room is dark. The story moves slowly. Your breathing finds a steady rhythm that feels older than technology, older than spaceflight. A rhythm shaped by countless nights under one dependable sky. As the section fades, time feels less sharp, less demanding. The circadian clock inside you softens its ticking, satisfied for the moment that you're listening. You don't notice the moment the story tilts from biology into physics, because it happens the way sleep always does, quietly without announcement. One moment you're thinking about internal clocks, the next you're drifting into the strange idea that time itself might not be keeping perfect time anymore. Not broken, just flexible. Here's the solid, mainstream fact that anchors this section before your thoughts float too far off. Astronauts aboard the International Space Station experience real, measurable time dilation. According to Einstein's theory of relativity, time moves slightly differently for objects that are moving very fast or are farther from Earth's gravity. The space station is doing both. As a result, astronauts age just a tiny bit more slowly than people on the ground. Why, it's only a few milliseconds over a long mission, but it's real, tested, and corrected for in satellite systems every day. You let that sink in gently. No dramatic sci-fi music, just the quiet realization that time is not as strict as it pretends to be. And if time bends even a little, you start to wonder what that means for a process like sleep, which depends entirely on timing. You imagine yourself floating alongside the station, Earth curving below, stars fixed and indifferent. Your body, if it were there, would be moving at thousands of miles per hour, yet feel still. That contradiction is the heart of relativity. Motion without sensation, change without awareness. Sleep, you realize, feels oddly similar. Hours pass, but subjectively, nothing happens at all. NASA didn't send astronauts to space to study philosophy, but physics has a way of nudging philosophy into the room anyway. Researchers began asking whether the brain notices these tiny shifts in time. Not consciously, of course. No astronaut wakes up and says, "Ah, yes, I slept 0.0002 seconds less due to relativistic effects." But the brain is a sensitive instrument. It runs on rhythms measured in milliseconds. Neurons fire, pause, synchronize. Sleep stages cycle with surprising precision. Here's a quirky tidbit that fits just strangely enough to be true. Some sleep researchers have joked, half seriously, that the brain is the most accurate clock humans possess. Not your watch, not your phone, your brain. It tracks time through chemical cycles, electrical rhythms, and feedback loops. When those loops are disturbed, time perception goes fuzzy. In space, everything about timing is disturbed. Will you let out a mental smile as the first joke drifts by? Turns out time flies when you're having fun, but it also flies when you're orbiting Earth at 17,500 miles per hour. The second follows softly. Astronauts technically age better than the rest of us, and somehow still look tired. And the third, because the universe enjoys irony. Even when time slows down for you, sleep still feels too short. As the narration continues, the connection tightens. Sleep is structured. Light sleep, deep sleep, REM sleep, cycling roughly every 90 minutes. That number should sound familiar. 90 minutes is also about how long it takes the space station to orbit Earth once. One lap, one sunrise, one sunset. The coincidence isn't mystical, but it's irresistible. Your brain enjoys patterns, even accidental ones. Historians still argue whether Einstein himself ever speculated about sleep in relation to relativity, or whether later thinkers retroactively tried to connect the two because the idea feels poetic. What's clear is that both sleep and space-time challenge your intuition. They behave in ways that make perfect sense mathematically, but feel deeply strange subjectively. NASA scientists noticed that astronauts' sleep cycles sometimes drifted out of their usual structure. REM periods arrived early or late. Deep sleep shortened. The architecture of sleep, how it's built across the night, changed. While many factors contribute to this, from stress to microgravity, the background hum of altered time doesn't go unnoticed. When your entire environment runs on a slightly different clock, your brain has to guess where it fits. When you feel your own sense of timing soften now, the story isn't rushing, there's no countdown, just a slow, deliberate unfolding. That's intentional, because sleep, like relativity, resists being hurried. Try to force it, and it slips away. Another layer drifts into view. Gravity. On Earth, gravity subtly influences how fluids move in your body, how your inner ear senses balance, how pressure shifts when you lie down. In orbit, gravity all but disappears. Blood redistributes. The brain floats differently within the skull. It's not painful, just unfamiliar. Some researchers have wondered whether this physical change alters how the brain perceives duration. After all, your sense of time is deeply linked to your sense of motion and orientation. NASA hasn't declared a final answer. Science rarely does. But the questions themselves are telling. If sleep depends on precise timing, and timing depends on physical context, then sleep may be one of the most sensitive indicators of space-time effects on the human body. Not dramatic enough for headlines, just quietly profound. You breathe in slowly, breathe out even slower. The idea lands without needing to be understood fully. When you sleep, you step outside of ordinary time. When astronauts sleep, they do that while literally existing in a different temporal frame than the rest of humanity. Two layers of time distortion stacked gently on top of each other. You might notice that thinking about time this way doesn't feel stressful. It feels distant, abstract, safe. That's because the story keeps you grounded even as it floats. You're not responsible for measuring milliseconds or correcting clocks. You're just listening. NASA continues to study sleep with sensors, schedules, and carefully controlled environments, but there's an unspoken respect beneath the data. Sleep is not just rest. It's a state where the brain negotiates its relationship with time. In space, that negotiation becomes visible. As this section eases toward stillness, one last thought drifts through like a satellite crossing the sky. If time can stretch and compress, and sleep can erase it entirely, maybe the most human response to a relativistic universe isn't panic or calculation. Maybe it's rest. You don't need to solve space-time tonight. You just need to let it pass you by, gently, while you drift. You remain suspended in that comfortable middle space, where the story feels less like information and more like a slow-moving environment. Time doesn't push you forward, it carries you. And now, without any sharp turn or announcement, your attention drifts into the body itself, specifically what happens to it when gravity quietly steps out of the room. Microgravity sounds gentle, almost cute, like something you'd find in a toy store science kit. In reality, it's one of the most disruptive environments the human body can experience. This is the mainstream, well-established fact anchoring you here. When astronauts enter orbit, gravity's constant downward pull effectively disappears, and nearly every system in the body begins to adapt. Muscles weaken, bones lose density, fluids shift upward, and sleep changes in ways NASA didn't fully expect at first. You imagine lying down without the familiar pressure points, no mattress pushing back, no subtle reminder of up or down. Astronauts don't really lie on a bed, and they zip themselves into sleeping bags that keep them from drifting into equipment or walls. Your body, so used to gravity gently pinning it in place, suddenly has no reference, and the brain notices. One of the earliest observations NASA made was that astronauts often reported lighter, more fragmented sleep in microgravity. They fell asleep, but staying asleep felt slippery. Part of this comes from fluid shifts. Blood and other fluids move toward the head, creating a feeling of congestion, sometimes called puffy face syndrome. Not painful, just uncomfortable. You try to imagine drifting off with a mild head cold that never quite clears. Not ideal. Here's a quirky tidbit that feels strangely intimate. Astronauts sometimes say they miss the feeling of weight on their eyelids. On Earth, gravity helps your eyelids close and stay closed. In an orbit, that gentle pull is gone. It's a tiny detail, but it matters. Sleep is built from tiny details. You smile faintly as the first joke floats by. Turns out gravity has been doing more bedtime work than you ever thanked it for. The second follows. Microgravity, great for floating pens, terrible for feeling tucked in. And the third arrives softly. Even your eyelids apparently enjoy being grounded. As you breathe slowly, the narration continues its unhurried glide. Microgravity doesn't just change comfort, it changes physiology. Your inner ear, responsible for balance and spatial orientation, relies on gravity to make sense of motion. Remove gravity, and the signals become confusing. Some astronauts experience space motion sickness early in missions, while others feel subtly disoriented for weeks. And that disorientation doesn't stop when you close your eyes. It follows you into sleep. NASA researchers noticed that this sensory confusion might affect dreaming. While dreams are subjective and hard to measure, reports suggested that some astronauts experience unusually vivid or spatially strange dreams, floating, rotating, or lacking a clear sense of direction. Not nightmares, just unfamiliar landscapes. Your brain, deprived of its usual physical cues, improvises. Historians still argue whether early sleep science underestimated the role of gravity in shaping human rest, simply because gravity was assumed to be constant and therefore irrelevant. You don't study fish to understand water after all, until you take the water away. Space did exactly that, revealing how deeply gravity is woven into the act of sleeping. Another subtle effect of microgravity is breathing. On Earth, gravity influences how air moves through your lungs and how your chest rises and falls. In orbit, breathing becomes more uniform, less influenced by posture. Some astronauts report feeling like their breathing is unusually shallow or strangely effortless when they try to sleep. It's not dangerous, just unfamiliar. And unfamiliar is the enemy of deep rest. You let that thought drift past without gripping it. Your own breathing is steady, reliable, comfortably boring. NASA's job is to notice when boring changes. They found that heart rate variability, a key indicator of how relaxed or stressed the body is, often shifts in space, especially during sleep. The nervous system recalibrates, trying to decide whether it's safe to fully power down. Now, this is where the connection to space-time quietly reappears. The body uses physical cues, pressure, balance, resistance, to help the brain orient itself in time. Day feels different from night, not just because of light, but because of posture, movement, and gravity. Remove or alter those cues, and the brain loses some of its temporal landmarks. Sleep becomes lighter, less anchored. You might notice that as you listen, your own body feels heavier by contrast. Supported. Pressed gently into place. That's not an accident. Your brain recognizes safety and consistency. Gravity whispers, "You're still here." In space, that whisper goes silent, and the brain has to work harder to reassure itself. NASA has experimented with countermeasures, exercise before bed, carefully timed routines. It's structured sleep environments, but microgravity remains a constant background influence. Astronauts adapt, but adaptation doesn't mean perfection. Sleep improves over time, but it rarely becomes as deep or effortless as it is on Earth. Here comes another small, sleepy realization. Sleep evolved under gravity. Every mammal you can think of learned to rest while pressed against something. Ground, nest, branch, body. Floating sleep is new. Very new. Evolution hasn't had time to fine-tune it. NASA's data, quietly collected over decades, reflects that evolutionary mismatch. The story softens further as the idea settles. Space doesn't harm sleep outright. It just removes assumptions your brain didn't know it was making. That weight equals rest. That stillness has a direction. That down means safe. Without those assumptions, sleep becomes a more active process, something the brain has to negotiate rather than surrender to. You notice that even thinking about microgravity doesn't feel unsettling right now. It feels distant, abstract, like watching slow-motion footage of someone else floating. That's good. That means your mind is loosening its grip, letting the story carry the complexity so you don't have to. NASA continues to study these effects not just for curiosity, but for the future. Longer missions, lunar bases, Mars with its weaker gravity. Each environment will reshape sleep in subtle ways. Understanding microgravity's sleepy side effects is a step toward understanding how flexible, or fragile, human rest really is. As this section drifts toward its close, gravity gently reasserts itself where you are. The quiet pressure of your body against whatever supports it, the steady rise and fall of your chest. You don't need to float tonight. You get to rest the old-fashioned way. And somewhere far above, astronauts do their best to do the same, proving that even when space bends bodies and time, sleep remains stubbornly, beautifully human. You drift onward without noticing a seam, the way dreams change scenes without bothering to explain themselves. Somewhere between microgravity and memory, the The story settles into a softer, stranger place, the place where sleep turns into dreaming. Because once NASA began listening carefully to how astronauts slept, they couldn't ignore what many of them said next. Their dreams felt different up there. This isn't mystical or exaggerated. Hey, here's the mainstream fact anchoring you gently. Astronauts have long been asked to record subjective experiences during missions, including sleep quality and dream recall. Across multiple missions, many reported changes in dream vividness, spatial awareness, and emotional tone. Not all of them. Not dramatically every night, but often enough to raise quiet eyebrows in research rooms. You imagine an astronaut closing their eyes, zipped into a sleeping bag, Earth rolling silently beneath them. The brain, freed from gravity and overwhelmed with novelty during waking hours, finally loosens its grip. And when it does, the dream world opens. Familiar, yet subtly rearranged. One recurring theme appears in reports. Dreams of floating, not flying exactly. Flying implies effort, intention. Floating is passive, weightless. Astronauts describe dreams where movement happens without pushing, where direction is optional, where up and down simply don't apply. If you've ever dreamed of drifting through a hallway or hovering above the ground, you've brushed against the same sensation, just without the training. Here's a quirky tidbit that feels almost poetic. Some astronauts say their dreams in space feel more continuous, less fragmented. On Earth, dreams often jump wildly from scene to scene. In orbit, a few reported longer, smoother dream narratives, as if the mind had adopted the slow, uninterrupted glide of orbital motion. It's not universal, but it's oddly consistent. You let that image pass through you like a cloud. No need to analyze it too hard. The first joke floats by gently. Apparently, even your dreams get jet lag. Now the second follows. Turns out your brain enjoys floating so much it keeps doing it after hours. And the third arrives with a yawn. Astronauts may travel millions of miles, but they still can't escape weird dreams about work. Dreams are notoriously hard to study. They vanish on waking, reshaped by memory and language. NASA knows this. Still, patterns matter. Researchers notice that astronauts often recall dreams more vividly during missions, especially early on. One explanation is simple: novelty. The brain is flooded with new experiences, and dreams love fresh material. But there's another layer, quieter and more intriguing. Dreams are deeply tied to how the brain integrates sensory information. On Earth, gravity constantly informs your sense of body position. In space, that signal goes quiet. The dreaming brain, always trying to make sense of the self in space, fills in the gap creatively. Historians still argue whether dreams should be treated primarily as psychological phenomena or as byproducts of neurological housekeeping. Space adds a third option: dreams as adaptive simulations. The brain rehearsing how to exist in an unfamiliar physical reality. Floating through dream space might be practice. You feel your own body sink more deeply into stillness as the thought settles. On Earth, dreams often involve walking, running, falling. Those are gravity-heavy activities. In orbit, falling loses its meaning. Some astronauts report fewer falling dreams, replaced by drifting or slow rotation. The dream world updates its physics engine. NASA hasn't declared this a new category of dreaming, no official label, no dramatic press release. But internally, to sleep researchers pay attention. Dream content offers clues about how the brain rewires itself under altered conditions. It's subtle evidence, but subtlety is where sleep lives. Another curious observation appears in reports: emotional tone. Some astronauts describe dreams that feel calmer, less anxious, despite the inherent stress of spaceflight. Others report the opposite: dreams tinged with disorientation or longing for Earth. Both make sense. Dreams often process emotional residue. In space, emotions are amplified by isolation, awe, and distance. You let that duality rest beside you: calm and unease, wonder and homesickness. Dreams hold contradictions without complaint. That's one of their talents. There's also the matter of REM sleep, the stage most closely associated with vivid dreaming. NASA data suggests that REM patterns can shift in space. sometimes shorter, sometimes redistributed across the sleep period. Changes in REM timing could influence not just how much you dream, but how you remember those dreams. And memory, as you know, is selective and playful. Here comes another gentle joke. Your dreams are already unreliable narrators, and space apparently gives them creative freedom. Followed by a second. REM sleep in orbit, same service, different gravity, and the third barely audible. Even in space, your brain still insists on symbolism. Dreams also have a relationship with time that mirrors space-time in an uncanny way. A dream that lasts seconds can feel like hours. Events stretch, compress, loop. Astronauts already living in an environment where time behaves oddly step into dreams that ignore clocks entirely. Or two layers of temporal weirdness, stacked like blankets. You might notice your own sense of time loosening now. The narration isn't rushing, it doesn't need to. Dream logic has already crept in, softening edges. That's intentional, because talking about dreams tends to invite them closer. NASA remains cautious. Scientists avoid grand claims. Still, the pattern is there. Alter the body's relationship with space and time, and the dreaming mind responds. Not with panic, but with creativity. Dreams adapt faster than waking thought. They're flexible, experimental, unconcerned with rules. Some researchers quietly wonder whether dreaming helps astronauts emotionally integrate the vastness of space. Earth from orbit is overwhelming, beautiful, fragile, unreal. Dreams may act as a buffer, translating that enormity into symbols the mind can handle. A floating hallway, a slow spin, a calm, endless night. You don't need to decide whether that's true. Historians still argue whether dreams have purpose at all, or whether meaning is something we drape over random neural activity after the fact. Space doesn't settle the debate, but it enriches it. As this section eases toward rest, you realize something comforting. Even in the most extreme environment humans have ever entered, the dreaming mind continues to do what it's always done. It tells stories, it explores, it softens reality. You're not in orbit. You're right where you need to be. But your brain shares more with astronauts than you might think. Tonight, as you drift closer to sleep, your dreams will follow their own gentle physics, and they won't need gravity to do it. You don't quite notice when the dreams fade back into something more technical, because the transition is smooth, like passing through a thin cloud layer. The imagery stays soft, but now light itself takes center stage, light and darkness, blinking on and off far too often for any sensible brain to keep up with. This is where the struggle really sharpens, even as the narration remains slow and calm. Here's the grounded, mainstream fact easing you into this stretch. Astronauts aboard the International Space Station experience about 16 sunrises and 16 sunsets every 24 hours. That's not poetic exaggeration. It's orbital mechanics. Every 90 minutes, the station circles Earth, dragging its crew through rapid cycles of brilliant sunlight and sudden night. For a brain built around one sunrise and one sunset, this is a lot. You imagine trying to sleep with the sun popping in to say hello every hour and a half. Even with window shutters and carefully designed lighting, the knowledge lingers. Somewhere outside, the universe keeps flipping the switch. Your circadian system, already confused, throws its hands up and mutters something unprintable. PG-13, of course. NASA quickly realized that uncontrolled light exposure was one of the biggest enemies of sleep in space. On Earth, light is the primary cue that tells your brain when to be awake and when to rest. Bright light suppresses melatonin, darkness allows it to rise. In orbit, light becomes unreliable, almost mischievous. The result? Melatonin release drifts, fragments, and occasionally goes missing altogether. One hears a quirky tidbit that feels oddly domestic. Astronauts sometimes personalize their sleeping quarters with small visual cues, photos, patches of darkness, familiar textures, to trick their brains into recognizing night. It's not about aesthetics, it's about comfort, about signaling safety and rest to a nervous system that no longer trusts the sun. You smile faintly as the first joke floats by. 16 sunrises a day sounds beautiful until you're trying to nap. The second follows. Apparently the sun has boundary issues in low Earth orbit, and the third arrives gently. Astronauts learned very quickly that blackout curtains are not optional. NASA responded with engineering rather than poetry. They developed advanced lighting systems that shift color temperature throughout the station's artificial day. Bright, blue-white light for morning, warmer tones for evening. This approach is grounded in solid sleep science. Blue light stimulates alertness. Warm light encourages wind down. It helps, but it doesn't solve everything. You let that settle as your breathing slows. Light, it turns out, is not just illumination, it's information. On Earth, it carries a reliable message. Time is passing normally. In orbit, the message is scrambled. The brain has to choose which signals to believe, the artificial lights inside, or the wild, rapid flashes of reality outside. Historians still argue whether modern humans underestimated light's power because artificial lighting became so common so quickly. We mastered electricity before we fully understood circadian biology. Spaceflight forced the issue. When light goes wrong, sleep follows. Another subtle observation emerged from NASA's studies. Even when astronauts adhered strictly to scheduled sleep times, their subjective sense of night sometimes didn't match the clock. They lay in darkness, eyes closed, but felt awake. Not anxious, just alert. As if their brains were waiting for permission that never quite arrived. You recognize that feeling, don't you? Lying in bed, knowing it's late, but feeling oddly untethered from the concept of night. Space just exaggerates that experience, stretching it across weeks and months. Light also shapes dreams. On Earth, early morning REM sleep often coincides with rising light levels. In orbit, that pattern breaks. REM may arrive at unexpected times, sometimes deep in the station's artificial night. Dreams detach further from external cues, becoming more inward, more self-generated. You feel the narration slow a touch here, deliberately, because this is where light and space-time brush against each other again. Light isn't just a circadian signal, it's a fundamental player in physics. It sets the cosmic speed limit. It links time and space, and now it's interfering with sleep, quietly reminding you that the same thing governing galaxies also decides when you feel tired. Another trio of gentle jokes drifts through like background static. Astronauts chase darkness the way people on Earth chase good Wi-Fi. The sun is punctual everywhere except where you want it to be. And even in space, your brain still complains about the lighting. NASA continues refining lighting schedules, testing intensities, colors, and durations. The goal isn't just better sleep, it's long-term mental health, where chronic circadian disruption affects mood, cognition, and physical well-being. Light management becomes a form of medicine, administered softly through LEDs. As you lie still, you notice how calm your own lighting feels by comparison. One steady level, no sudden cosmic interruptions. Your brain relaxes into that consistency, grateful even if you don't consciously thank it. And that's the quiet takeaway, drifting into the close of this section. Sleep depends on darkness the way stories depend on pauses. Too much interruption, and nothing settles. In space, darkness has to be carefully constructed. On Earth, it arrives on its own. The narration dims with it. Light fades, time stretches, and for once, the universe outside doesn't interrupt the night you're easing into. You don't notice the shift at first, because the story keeps the same unhurried pace, the same low light. But now the focus slips inward, past eyelids and dreams, down into the quiet electrical weather of your brain. This is where NASA starts listening, not just to how astronauts feel when they sleep, but to what their neurons are actually doing while they drift. Here's the mainstream fact gently grounding you. NASA and its research partners have used EEG recordings, electroencephalograms, to measure astronauts' brainwaves before, during, and after space missions. EEGs track patterns of neural activity associated with different sleep stages: light sleep, deep slow-wave sleep, and REM. These tools are standard in sleep science on Earth, and they've been carefully adapted for use in orbit. You imagine tiny sensors resting against a shaved scalp, the wires floating softly instead of hanging down. The brain beneath them hums, pulses, synchronizes. On Earth, certain rhythms reliably appear as you fall asleep. Slow waves roll through the cortex during deep sleep like gentle tides. Faster, Twitchier patterns show up during REM, when dreams become vivid and strange. In space, those rhythms still appear, but not always where or when researchers expect them. NASA scientists noticed that slow-wave sleep, the deepest and most physically restorative stage, sometimes shortened in orbit. Not vanished, just trimmed. The brain dipped into depth, then resurfaced sooner than usual. This mattered because slow-wave sleep is when the body repairs tissue, strengthens immune response, and clears metabolic waste from the brain. It's the housekeeping shift, and it doesn't like to be rushed. Here's a quirky tidbit that feels oddly intimate. Some astronauts describe deep sleep in space as feeling thinner, like slipping under a blanket instead of sinking into a mattress. The EEG data quietly supports that metaphor. The slow waves are there, but they don't always grow as tall or linger as long. You smile faintly as the first joke drifts by. Apparently, even your brain waves feel lighter without gravity. The second follows, deep sleep in space, now with less depth. And the third arrives like a sleepy aside. Astronauts still get brainwaves, just not the deluxe edition. The brain is exquisitely sensitive to context. Temperature, light, posture, sound, stress. All of it shapes neural rhythms. In orbit, context changes everywhere at once. The brain adapts, but adaptation takes effort, and effort is the opposite of rest. When NASA also observes subtle shifts in sleep spindles, brief bursts of activity associated with memory consolidation. These spindles help move information from short-term storage into long-term memory. In space, their timing sometimes drifts. The brain still learns, still remembers, but the filing system gets reorganized. Historians still argue whether early neuroscience overemphasized the universality of brain rhythms, assuming they would look the same in all environments. Space challenges that assumption. It suggests that even your most fundamental neural patterns are shaped by where and how you exist. You feel your own thoughts slowing as the narration continues. Talking about brainwaves has a funny effect. It invites your brain to listen to itself. The background hum grows more noticeable. Thoughts stretch out. Gaps between them widen. And another layer quietly enters the story. Synchronization. On Earth, large networks of neurons tend to fall into step during deep sleep, firing together in slow, coordinated waves. This synchrony is thought to be crucial for restoration. In microgravity, some researchers wonder whether altered sensory input disrupts that coordination, making it harder for the brain to fully lock in. NASA hasn't declared a verdict, but the pattern is suggestive. Sleep in space isn't broken, it's slightly desynchronized. A system still functioning, but with looser timing. You might notice how comforting synchronization feels right now. Your breath aligns with the pacing of the voice. The pauses feel predictable. That predictability is soothing. The brain likes knowing what comes next. Another trio of soft jokes drifts through, almost like background static. Even neurons get jet lag. Your brain prefers stable Wi-Fi and stable gravity, and deep sleep apparently doesn't enjoy floating schedules. There's also the question of plasticity. The brain changes itself in response to experience, and sleep is when much of that change is cemented. Astronauts are learning constantly, new routines, new spatial skills, new problem-solving strategies. Their brains are busy. NASA researchers wonder whether altered sleep rhythms affect how efficiently that learning sticks. Here's where space-time sneaks back in, barely announced. Brain waves are rhythms in time. They are literally patterns of timing when neurons fire, pause, and fire again. If your environment subtly alters your relationship with time, it makes sense that these rhythms might shift too. Not dramatically. One just enough to notice if you're looking closely. You don't need to look closely tonight. The story does that for you. You just let the idea rest beside you, like a thought placed gently on a nightstand. As this section eases toward its end, something reassuring settles in. Despite all the changes, light, gravity, motion, the sleeping brain remains remarkably resilient. It adjusts, it compensates, it finds new rhythms when old ones wobble. NASA's EEG traces from orbit don't show chaos, they show adaptation. A brain doing its best in a strange place. And here, in your own quiet space, your brain is doing something even simpler. Slowing, synchronizing, letting go. The waves soften, the pauses lengthen, and without effort, you drift a little deeper into your own steady rhythm. You don't surface between thoughts. You simply glide onward, as if the story has found a stable orbit of its own. The brainwaves fade gently into the background, and something bigger drifts into view. Time itself, not as a concept on a clock face, but as something your body experiences through sleep. This is where the ideas NASA has been circling begin to line up in an unexpectedly elegant way. Here's the grounded, mainstream fact to steady you. Human sleep follows a predictable pattern of cycles, each lasting about 90 minutes, moving from light sleep into deep sleep and then into REM. These cycles repeat through the night, forming the architecture of rest. This structure is one of the most robust findings in sleep science, confirmed across cultures, ages, and environments, until spaceflight began to bend it. You already know that 90 minutes is familiar. In orbit, if the space station circles Earth roughly every 90 minutes as well. One lap, one cycle. It's a coincidence, not a cosmic message, but your brain likes it anyway. Patterns soothe, and sleep, above all, loves rhythm. NASA researchers noticed that REM sleep, the phase most associated with dreaming and emotional processing, sometimes shifted in orbit. REM might arrive earlier than expected or cluster differently across the sleep period. Deep sleep might shrink slightly, while REM stretches or fragments. Nothing catastrophic, just different. And difference in science is where curiosity wakes up. Here's a quirky tidbit that feels delightfully strange. Some astronauts report that dreams in space feel like they happen outside of time. Not longer or shorter, just detached from any sense of sequence. Name one moment flows into the next without urgency. That subjective report mirrors what many people experience on Earth, but space seems to amplify it. You smile faintly as the first joke floats by. REM sleep already ignores your schedule, and space apparently encourages it. The second follows. Your dreams don't know what time it is, and frankly, they don't care. And the third drifts in quietly. Astronauts may orbit Earth on a strict timetable, but their dreams absolutely do not. This is where Einstein quietly clears his throat in the corner of the room. Relativity tells us that time is not absolute. It depends on motion and gravity. REM sleep tells us that subjective time is not absolute either. It stretches, compresses, loops. NASA researchers didn't set out to connect these ideas, but once you see the parallel, it's hard to unsee. Historians still argue whether the concept of subjective time should be treated as seriously as physical time, or whether it belongs more to psychology and philosophy. Spaceflight blurs that boundary. When astronauts experience both physical time dilation and altered subjective time through sleep, the separation feels less clean. You let that idea drift without effort. REM sleep has always been strange. Your muscles are mostly paralyzed. Your brain is highly active. Your sense of time dissolves. Add space-time effects, disrupted circadian cues, and microgravity, and REM becomes a kind of natural laboratory for studying how the mind experiences duration. NASA has quietly explored this by comparing REM patterns before, during, and after missions. One observation stands out. Upon returning to Earth, many astronauts' REM sleep temporarily rebounds. More REM, longer REM, as if the brain is catching up, replaying, reorganizing experiences that didn't quite fit into its usual timing framework while in orbit. You feel your own sense of duration loosen as the narration continues. Minutes feel less important. The present moment stretches comfortably. That's not accidental. Talking about REM tends to invite it closer, even while you're still awake enough to listen. Another trio of gentle jokes drifts through like slow-moving clouds. REM sleep is the brain's favorite improv session. Time flies when you're dreaming, unless it stops entirely. And even Einstein probably had weird dreams, though historians still argue whether he remembered them. REM sleep also plays a role in emotional regulation. It helps soften the edges of intense experiences, integrating them into memory without overwhelming the waking mind. Spaceflight is full of intense experiences: danger, beauty, isolation, awe. Altered REM timing might change how those experiences are processed, not consciously, but emotionally. NASA researchers wonder whether protecting a REM sleep is as important as protecting total sleep time on long missions. If dreams are how the brain processes time and experience, then disrupting them could subtly alter how astronauts feel, think, and remember. Here's where the connection tightens again. Time dilation in space is tiny, almost negligible biologically. But sleep cycles are not tiny. They're the brain's primary way of organizing experience in time. If those cycles shift, the mind's internal timeline shifts with them. You don't need equations to feel this. You've lived it. Has a short nap that feels endless. A long night that disappears in a blink. Sleep doesn't just happen in time, it reshapes it. As this section drifts toward its close, the idea settles gently beside you. REM sleep may be where the human mind practices existing in a universe where time isn't fixed. A nightly rehearsal for relativity, played out behind closed eyes. NASA hasn't declared that sleep explains space-time, but it's quietly acknowledging that sleep might be one of the few states where humans naturally experience time as flexible. You rest with that thought, not trying to hold it, just letting it float. Time softens again. The story continues, and you drift right along with it. You continue without effort, as if the story has stopped moving forward and started unfolding around you instead. The focus narrows now. It not outward toward orbiting stations or blinking suns, but inward, toward the quiet sense you carry of before and after. Because somewhere inside your skull lives an arrow of time, and sleep has a curious way of bending it. Here's the solid mainstream fact anchoring you gently. Neuroscientists have shown that the brain does not experience time uniformly. Your perception of duration depends on attention, memory, emotion, and physiological state. During sleep, especially deep sleep and REM, this perception changes dramatically. Time can feel compressed, expanded, or absent altogether. This isn't speculation. It's been demonstrated repeatedly in laboratory studies on Earth. You don't need a lab to know it, though. You've closed your eyes for what felt like moments and woken hours later. Or you've dreamed an entire story in the space between two alarms. The arrow of time inside your head doesn't always point in a straight line. Physicists talk about the arrow of time as the direction in which entropy increases. Things fall apart, not together. Neuroscientists talk about time differently. For the brain, time is built from memory. You know the past because you remember it. You know the present because it's being encoded. The future is a prediction. Sleep interferes with this system in the most peaceful way possible. NASA researchers began to notice that astronauts sometimes described a softened sense of sequence during long missions. Days blurred together. Events felt less sharply ordered. Not confusion, just a gentle smoothing of edges. Sleep disruption played a role, but so did the environment itself. Again, when external time cues are unstable, the brain's internal timeline loses some of its rigidity. Here's a quirky tidbit that feels strangely intimate. Some astronauts keep personal journals in orbit, not just to record events, but to anchor time. Writing becomes a way to say, this happened before that. A handwritten arrow of time, reinforced by ink. You let that image pass through your mind without holding on to it. The first joke drifts by quietly. Turns out, time flies when you're having fun, and gently meanders when you're floating above Earth. The second follows. Astronauts don't lose track of time. They just negotiate with it. And the third arrives softly. Even in space, Monday still knows how to feel like Monday. Sleep is where the brain normally repairs its sense of order. During deep sleep, memories are replayed and sorted. During REM, emotional connections are softened and reorganized. This nightly process helps keep your internal timeline coherent. When sleep becomes fragmented, that coherence loosens. Events feel less distinct. Time feels flatter. Historians still argue whether early thinkers underestimated the role of sleep in shaping human consciousness, treating it as a passive state rather than an active organizer of experience. Modern neuroscience leans strongly toward the latter. Sleep doesn't just rest the brain, it edits it. NASA's interest in this goes beyond comfort. On long-duration missions, maintaining a clear sense of sequence matters. Procedures must be followed in order. Memories must be reliable. Decision-making depends on a stable mental timeline. If sleep disruption subtly bends that timeline, the effects may ripple outward. You notice how calm it feels to think about this without urgency. There's no test, no quiz, just a gentle idea settling in. Your sense of time is not fixed. It's constructed, nightly while you rest. Another layer slips into focus. During wakefulness, your brain constantly predicts what will happen next. This predictive process gives time its forward momentum. In sleep, especially dreaming, prediction loosens. Scenes change without cause. Consequences don't always follow actions. The arrow of time wobbles, sometimes looping back on itself. NASA researchers have wondered whether this flexibility is a feature, not a bug. A way for the brain to explore alternative timelines safely, to integrate experiences without the pressure of real-world sequence. In space, where daily routines are already unusual, in this dream time flexibility may become more pronounced. You feel your own thoughts drifting more freely now, less linear, more associative. That's not accidental. Talking about time's arrow tends to soften it. Another trio of gentle jokes floats through like distant radio chatter. Your brain owns a very bendy calendar. Dreams are allergic to timelines. And even in zero gravity, procrastination somehow survives. There's also the matter of aging. On Earth, you age at a steady biological pace, loosely aligned with chronological time. In space, due to tiny relativistic effects, astronauts age a fraction of a fraction slower. It's negligible biologically, but symbolically powerful. The body and the clock disagree, if only slightly. Sleep sits between those two systems. It's biological timekeeping. It measures life not in seconds, but in cycles of restoration. When those cycles change, your subjective sense of aging and duration can shift too. Astronauts sometimes report that missions feel both very long and very short in retrospect. Time stretches forward, then collapses backward. Historians still argue whether this retrospective distortion of time is universal in extreme experiences or uniquely amplified by spaceflight. What's clear is that sleep plays a central role in how those memories are formed and retrieved. You breathe slowly. The story doesn't hurry you. There's nowhere else to be. That's the quiet gift of this section. It lets you feel, rather than analyze, how gentle the arrow of time can become. Inside your skull, neurons fire, pause, and reconnect. Each pause is as important as each signal. Time is built from those pauses. Sleep lengthens them, smooths them, makes them forgiving. NASA continues to study sleep as a biological necessity, but also as a window into how humans experience time under unfamiliar conditions. The data is careful, conservative, but the implications are quietly expansive. If sleep can bend the arrow of time inside the mind, then altered sleep in altered space may reveal just how flexible human consciousness really is. You don't need to chase that thought. Let it drift past like everything else tonight. As this section eases toward stillness, the arrow of time inside you softens its point. Past and future relax their grip. There's only this gentle moment, stretched comfortably wide. And that, perhaps, is what sleep has always been doing, turning sharp arrows into curves, one night at a time. You keep drifting, not forward exactly, but inward, as if the story has dimmed the lights a little more and invited something subtler to step onto the stage. The big ideas, space-time, sleep cycles, neural rhythms, fade into the background, and now something quieter takes their place. Something that arrives without sound, without warning, often while eyes are closed. Cosmic radiation. Here's the grounded mainstream fact anchoring you gently. Astronauts in orbit are exposed to higher levels of cosmic radiation than people on Earth. Outside the protection of the planet's thick atmosphere and magnetic field, high-energy particles from the sun and deep space pass through spacecraft, and sometimes through human bodies. This exposure is carefully monitored by NASA because of its long-term health risks. You imagine these particles not as threats, but as messengers, tiny, fast, indifferent. They don't knock. They don't care if it's night. They pass straight through metal, skin, bone, and sometimes the brain. Most of the time, you'd never notice. But occasionally, when astronauts close their eyes in darkness, they do. This is where the story gets quietly strange. Astronauts have reported seeing brief flashes of light while trying to fall asleep. Not dreams, not imagination. These flashes are caused by cosmic rays interacting directly with the visual system, triggering neurons as they pass. NASA has confirmed this phenomenon. It's rare, harmless in the moment, and deeply surreal. Here's the quirky tidbit that makes your mind smile. Some astronauts describe these flashes as looking like tiny fireworks or streaks, appearing even when their eyes are shut tight. Imagine drifting toward sleep and the universe itself taps your retina and says, "Still here." The first joke drifts by softly. Turns out space comes with its own nightlight. The second follows, astronauts don't count sheep, they count particle strikes. And the third arrives gently. Even the cosmos refuses to let you sleep in complete darkness. These flashes don't happen constantly, and most astronauts stop noticing them over time. The brain adapts, filtering them out the way it filters background noise. Still, NASA researchers paid attention because sleep is a vulnerable state. The brain is quieter, more sensitive. And when neurons fire unexpectedly during that quiet, it raises interesting questions. Cosmic radiation doesn't just interact with vision. High-energy particles can pass through neural tissue, one briefly altering electrical activity along their path. The effects are tiny and fleeting, but measurable. In waking life, they're lost in the noise of constant brain activity. In sleep, especially light sleep, they stand out more clearly. Historians still argue whether early space planners underestimated the psychological effects of cosmic radiation because the physical risks felt more urgent. Cancer, DNA damage, equipment failure. Those were easier to quantify. The subtle influence on sleep and perception took longer to appreciate. You let this idea rest beside you, not alarming, just curious. The universe brushing past, literally, while humans sleep. There's something oddly comforting about it. Even in the quietest moments, you're still connected to everything else. NASA hasn't found evidence that cosmic radiation significantly disrupts sleep architecture on its own. The effects are too small, too brief, but in combination with microgravity, altered light cycles, and time distortion, these tiny interruptions add texture to the sleeping experience in orbit. Sleep in space is never completely sealed off from the cosmos. You notice how different your own darkness feels. Thick, stable, protective. Earth's atmosphere and magnetic field do a remarkable job of keeping the night truly dark. Down here, sleep is sheltered. Up there, it's more open. Another soft trio of jokes drifts through like background static. Earth comes with excellent shielding. Space does not respect bedtime boundaries. And even photons apparently have insomnia. There's a deeper layer to this, one that NASA researchers only hint at. Sleep is when the brain performs maintenance, clearing waste, strengthening connections, recalibrating sensitivity. If the sleeping brain is occasionally nudged by random cosmic events, even gently, it raises philosophical questions. How closed is sleep, really? How separate from the outside world? In physics, particles pass through you all the time. Neutrinos from the sun, from distant stars, from ancient cosmic events, stream through your body without notice. On Earth, you're blissfully unaware. In space, the awareness sometimes flickers on. You feel your breathing slow further as the idea settles. Sleep isn't isolation. It's a thinning of boundaries. On Earth, those boundaries feel solid. In orbit, they become porous. NASA studies this not with alarm, but with respect. Thus, long-duration missions beyond Earth's magnetosphere, back to the Moon, onward to Mars, will expose astronauts to even more radiation. Understanding how that environment interacts with sleep matters, not just for health, but for mental stability and comfort. You don't need to worry about cosmic rays tonight. They're not visiting you. Your sleep is well shielded, wrapped in atmosphere and gravity and familiarity. The universe keeps its distance, politely. As this section eases toward stillness, the idea softens into something almost poetic. Even while sleeping, humans in space are in conversation with the cosmos, not through words, but through particles and flashes and fleeting neural sparks. Up there, the night sky doesn't just surround you, it passes through. Down here, you're safe, quiet, uninterrupted. And with that reassurance, in the darkness feels deeper, calmer, more complete, exactly the way sleep likes it. You drift without resistance into a much older night, one that existed long before space stations, EEGs, or carefully programmed LEDs. The story stretches backward now, not sharply, but like memory does, soft around the edges, guided more by feeling than by dates. Because long before NASA ever wondered how sleep behaves in orbit, humans were already linking sleep to the sky above them. Here's the steady, mainstream fact anchoring you gently. For most of human history, people lived without artificial light, orienting their lives and their sleep by the movement of the sun, moon, and stars. Archaeological and anthropological evidence shows that early societies tracked celestial cycles closely, using them to mark seasons, rituals, and nightly rest. Sleep and the sky were never separate. You imagine yourself thousands of years ago, lying on the ground or in a simple shelter, fire burned low, stars spilling across the sky with a clarity you rarely see now. No streetlights, no screens, just darkness and the slow, dependable rotation of the heavens. When the stars moved, time moved. When the sky dimmed, sleep arrived. Ancient stargazers didn't think in terms of circadian rhythms or melatonin, but they understood patterns. They noticed that certain stars rose when it was time to plant, harvest, travel, or rest. The night sky became a clock, vast and trustworthy, and sleep fit neatly inside it. Here's a quirky tidbit that feels almost charmingly human. Some ancient cultures practiced segmented sleep, sleeping for a few hours, waking briefly around midnight, then returning to sleep. This pattern aligned with long, dark nights and celestial observations. People would wake, reflect, sometimes pray, sometimes quietly watch the stars, then drift back into rest. The night wasn't an interruption, it was a companion. You smile softly as the first joke drifts by. Turns out humans invented stargazing before insomnia. The second follows. Ancient people didn't doom scroll, they just looked up. And the third arrives gently. Their sleep trackers were constellations. For early humans, the sky wasn't abstract. It was immediate. Stars didn't just mark time, they gave it meaning. Myths, stories, and dreams were woven directly into the patterns overhead. Many cultures believed dreams were messages from the same realm as the stars, a bridge between earthbound life and something vast and timeless. Historians still argue whether ancient humans slept more soundly because their nights were darker and quieter, or whether the absence of modern comfort made rest more fragile. What's clear is that sleep was deeply synchronized with the cosmos. The night sky didn't interrupt sleep, it structured it. As you breathe slowly, the story gently draws a line from those ancient nights to NASA's modern questions. Astronauts, floating above Earth, are once again sleeping in close proximity to the stars. Not metaphorically, literally. The difference is context. Ancient humans watch the sky from below. Astronauts sleep surrounded by it. NASA researchers sometimes reflect, quietly off the record, on how spaceflight returns humans to a more primal relationship with the universe. Without familiar landmarks, without stable day and night, when astronauts rely on schedules and instruments the way early humans relied on stars and intuition, sleep becomes an act of trust again. Another layer drifts in. Ancient stargazers often believed the heavens influenced human fate, mood, and behavior. While modern science rejects astrology, it has quietly confirmed something adjacent. Celestial cycles, light, darkness, seasonal change, do influence biology. Sleep is where that influence becomes most obvious. You feel the calm of continuity now. Thousands of years separate cave fires and space stations. Yet the human brain remains remarkably similar. It still looks for patterns. It still responds to darkness. It still dreams under the stars, whether those stars are overhead or outside a small window, moving at orbital speed. Another trio of gentle jokes floats through like embers. Ancient humans counted sheep under real constellations. The Big Dipper never asked for a firmware update, and at least meteors didn't vibrate your phone. There's also the matter of awe. Studies on Earth show that exposure to vast natural scenes, mountains, oceans, night skies, can alter perception of time. making it feel more expansive. Ancient humans experienced that regularly. Astronauts experience it intensely. Awe slows time in the mind. Sleep thrives in that spaciousness. NASA has noticed that astronauts often describe looking at Earth at night before sleep, watching city lights shimmer, storms flash silently, continents drift by. That view becomes a kind of modern campfire, a focal point, something steady in a shifting environment. Sleep comes easier after moments of quiet observation. You recognize this instinct. You felt calmer looking at the night sky, even briefly. Something about it reassures the nervous system. It places your concerns into a larger frame. Sleep doesn't need to fight for space when worries feel smaller. Historians still argue whether ancient myths about the sky were early attempts to understand physics, psychology, or simply storytelling. What's undeniable is that those myths often emerge from the same state you're approaching now, a half-awake, half-dreaming consciousness lying under the stars. Sleep, dreams, and the cosmos have always been braided together. NASA's research doesn't invent that connection, it rediscovers it under new conditions. For space-time equations and EEGs simply give modern language to something humans have felt for millennia. You let that realization settle without effort. The story doesn't rush you back to the present. It lets the ancient night linger, overlapping gently with the modern one. Somewhere between then and now, between firelight and spacecraft, the human brain continues to do what it's always done. It looks up, it dreams, it rests. And as this section eases toward its close, the stars, ancient and modern, fade into the background, leaving behind a familiar, comforting darkness. The kind that has always meant one thing to the human mind. It's safe to sleep. You don't feel the shift into this section as a turn so much as a widening, like the story has slowed enough to look at itself. Everything you've drifted through, sleep cycles, light, gravity, most dreams, ancient skies, gathers here into a single, gently unresolved question. This is where certainty softens, and disagreement is allowed to breathe. Here's the mainstream fact anchoring you before things blur too much. Despite decades of spaceflight and sleep research, there is still no single agreed-upon explanation for why sleep changes in space. NASA can describe what happens with increasing precision, but the deeper why remains open. Multiple mechanisms overlap: circadian disruption, microgravity, stress, altered light, isolation, and no single factor explains everything. This uncertainty is not a flaw, it's a signal. Historians still argue whether sleep changes in space because the human brain is poorly adapted to leaving Earth, or whether space simply reveals aspects of sleep that were always there, hidden by familiarity. And in other words, does space damage sleep, or does it expose it? You let that question rest beside you instead of trying to answer it. The story doesn't demand resolution. It invites contemplation, the kind that loosens muscles rather than tightening them. Some researchers lean toward adaptation theory. They argue that sleep evolved under very specific earthbound conditions: stable gravity, predictable days, reliable darkness. Remove those conditions, and sleep behaves differently because it must. From this view, altered sleep in space is not mysterious at all. It's expected. Others take a more provocative stance. They suggest that sleep might be fundamentally tied to how the brain experiences time. On Earth, time feels stable because the environment reinforces it. In space, where time subtly bends and cues fracture, a sleep reveals just how constructed your sense of time really is. From this angle, sleep isn't breaking, it's telling the truth. Here's a quirky tidbit that lives right on the edge of fringe. A small group of theorists has wondered whether sleep itself evolved as a biological response to time perception, not just energy conservation. The idea isn't mainstream, but it's intriguing, that sleep exists to regularly dissolve subjective time, giving the brain a reset from the constant forward pressure of experience. You smile softly as the first joke drifts by. Turns out even scientists argue best when they're well rested. The second follows: sleep science, where everyone agrees you need more sleep. And the third arrives gently. The biggest mystery in space might still be bedtime. NASA doesn't take sides publicly. It gathers data, carefully, She quietly, astronaut by astronaut, mission by mission, EEG trace by EEG trace. The agency knows that long-term exploration depends on understanding sleep not as a luxury, but as infrastructure. You can't explore space with a tired mind. But there's something else happening beneath the data, something human. Astronauts themselves often describe space as altering their relationship with time in ways that persist after they return. Days feel different. Priorities shift. Sleep on Earth feels heavier, deeper, almost indulgent at first, as if gravity itself is tucking them back in. You let that image soften your thoughts. The return, the exhale. This is where the pace begins to slow more noticeably now, where sentences stretch out, where ideas stop stacking and start dissolving. Because whether historians argue one way or another, whether neuroscientists land on biology or physics, one thing remains steady. Sleep is where the human mind lets go of certainty. It's where unresolved questions are allowed to exist without answers. And that's exactly what you're doing right now. You don't need to understand space-time tonight. You don't need to remember the details. Your brain doesn't require conclusions in order to rest. It only needs permission to slow. So imagine the questions themselves growing quieter, like voices lowering as a room empties. NASA's data dims into soft graphs. The space station drifts farther away. The stars fade from sharp points into a smooth, dark canvas. Your sense of time loosens its grip. There is no schedule here, no orbit to maintain, no cycle to track, just breath, in and out. Even, unrushed. Sleep doesn't demand answers, and it doesn't solve debates. It simply allows the mind to step outside of them for a while. And maybe that's the quiet connection NASA keeps brushing up against. That sleep is the one state where humans naturally experience something like space-time flexibility, where past and future soften, where duration loses meaning, where the mind floats free without leaving home. You are not traveling anywhere now. You are not floating. You are supported, grounded, safe. Let the universe do what it does without your help. Let time pass without being counted. Let the story fade into the background hum of your own breathing. There is nothing else to listen for, nothing else to follow. Just rest. You don't snap back to alertness after the wind down. You simply keep floating forward, slower now, softer, as if the story itself learned how to whisper. And the questions haven't disappeared. They've just settled into the background, like distant stars you no longer need to name. And into that quiet, something small drifts into view. Not an astronaut, not a philosopher, a mouse. Here's the solid, mainstream fact gently grounding you. NASA has sent laboratory mice into space on multiple missions to study how microgravity and altered environments affect biology, including sleep. These studies are carefully controlled, deeply documented, and foundational to understanding how mammals, humans included, adapt to space. You picture it, a tiny creature, whiskers twitching, suspended in an environment no mouse ever evolved for. No fields, no burrows, no up or down, just gentle floating in carefully designed habitats, watched over by scientists light years away in attention, if not in distance. Why mice? Because their sleep architecture shares key features with yours. They cycle through sleep stages. They experience REM-like states. They respond strongly to circadian cues, strip away the poetry, and sleep is a mammalian language, and mice speak a dialect close enough to be useful. NASA researchers noticed that mice in orbit showed changes in sleep timing and duration. Some slept in shorter bursts. Some shifted their activity patterns. Some adapted surprisingly quickly. The data didn't shout, it murmured, but the murmurs were consistent enough to matter. Here's a quirky tidbit that feels oddly endearing. Mice in microgravity often curl their tails around themselves while resting, as if trying to recreate the feeling of being grounded. No instructions, no training, just instinct, reaching for familiarity. You smile faintly as the first joke drifts by. Even mice want gravity blankets. The second follows. Space mice still nap better when they feel cozy. And the third arrives softly. Turns out the sleep lab is universal. What fascinated researchers most wasn't just that mouse sleep changed, but how. The changes echoed what astronauts reported: fragmentation, shifted timing, lighter rest at first, followed by gradual adaptation. Different species, similar patterns. That suggested something fundamental was at work, something deeper than human psychology or expectation. Historians still argue whether animal research has been undervalued in sleep science because subjective experience is harder to measure. You can't ask a mouse how it slept, but biology leaves traces. Hormones shift, brain rhythms change, behavior adapts. And those traces told a story that lined up neatly with human data. Mice also offered a crucial advantage: controlled environments. Their light exposure, activity cycles, and feeding schedules could be tightly regulated. When sleep still shifted despite those controls, it strengthened the case that space itself, microgravity, altered sensory input, subtle timing differences, was influencing rest at a biological level. You let that realization rest without effort. Even stripped of culture, expectation, and language, sleep still bends in space. That matters. Another layer quietly unfolds. Mouse studies allowed researchers to look at gene expression, how certain genes linked to circadian rhythms and neural repair turned up or down in orbit. Some of those genes overlapped with ones already known to regulate sleep on Earth. Well, space didn't invent new biology. It nudged existing systems into new configurations. NASA hasn't framed this as a revelation about space-time. It's framed as physiology. But the implication hums quietly beneath the data. If sleep-related genes respond to altered environments this consistently, then sleep may be one of the body's most sensitive instruments for detecting when reality itself has shifted. You feel your own body sink more fully into stillness as the idea settles. You don't need to monitor your genes tonight. You don't need sensors or habitats. Your environment is stable, predictable, kind. Another trio of gentle jokes floats through like distant static. Mice didn't sign up for space missions either. Lab animals also hate schedule changes, and even rodents agree that sleep is sacred. And the mouse studies also revealed something reassuring. Given enough time, many sleep patterns partially normalized. Adaptation happened. Not perfectly, not completely, but enough to suggest resilience. Mammalian sleep is flexible. It protests change, then learns to live with it. NASA takes comfort in that. If mice can adapt, perhaps humans can too, given the right support, lighting, schedules, and understanding. Sleep doesn't shatter when removed from Earth. It stretches, it reshapes, it negotiates. You notice how that word fits the night. Negotiate. Sleep isn't passive. It's an active agreement between brain and environment. On Earth, the terms are familiar. In space, they're renegotiated. Mice taught NASA that this negotiation happens at a deep biological level, far below conscious thought. As this section drifts toward quiet, watch the image of the mouse fades, not into nothing, but into symbol. A reminder that sleep is ancient, shared, and remarkably persistent. From rodents to astronauts to you, resting quietly wherever you are. You don't need to float in orbit to participate in that continuity. You're already part of it. Your breathing stays slow. Your body stays still. The story keeps watch. And somewhere in a carefully monitored habitat far above Earth, a small mammal curls inward and rests, proving once again that sleep finds a way. You keep drifting, slower than before, as if even the story has put on a soft wristband and decided to monitor itself quietly instead of speaking too loudly. The questions no longer loom. They observe. And now, fittingly, observation becomes the theme. Because this is where NASA starts watching sleep not with notebooks and guesses, but with tiny devices that never fully close their eyes. Here's the grounded, mainstream fact easing you in. Modern astronauts often wear biometric monitoring devices, advanced versions of the sleep trackers you might recognize on Earth. These wearables record movement, heart rate, temperature, and sometimes even light exposure, allowing NASA to study sleep patterns continuously during missions. This isn't experimental anymore. It's standard procedure. You imagine it, a small band on a wrist, snug but unobtrusive, floating slightly when the arm drifts. It doesn't judge. It doesn't interrupt. It just listens. Every micro movement, every pause in breathing, every subtle shift between rest and wakefulness. In space where traditional sleep labs are impractical, these quiet witnesses become essential. NASA learned something important almost immediately. Astronauts often thought they slept better than the data suggested. Not worse, better. Subjectively, rest felt adequate. Objectively, sleep was shorter and more fragmented. This gap between perception and physiology showed up again and again. You smile faintly as the first joke drifts by. Even in space, your sleep tracker knows more than you do. The second follows. Astronauts can orbit Earth, but they still can't fool their wearables. And the third arrives softly. Technology never sleeps, ironically. Wearables revealed patterns that diaries missed, frequent micro-awakenings, shifts in heart rate variability, subtle signs of circadian misalignment that didn't always rise to conscious awareness. The brain adapted just enough to feel okay, while the body quietly logged the difference. So here's a quirky tidbit that feels oddly relatable. Some astronauts gave their wearable devices nicknames. Not officially, of course, but informally. A little bit of humor goes a long way when something knows exactly how poorly you slept. Even in orbit, people personalize their relationship with data. These devices also track something deeper than sleep duration: recovery. On Earth, wearables often estimate how well your nervous system resets overnight. In space, those recovery scores sometimes dipped for days at a time, even when sleep schedules were followed. It suggested that rest isn't just about hours, it's about context. Historians still argue whether the rise of self-tracking has improved human well-being or simply made us anxious about numbers. In space, the argument shifts. Data becomes less about optimization and more about survival. You can't ignore sleep when the environment itself keeps nudging it out of alignment. NASA researchers began correlating wearable data with performance. Reaction times, mood reports, error rates, patterns emerge. Poor sleep didn't always cause immediate mistakes, but it eroded margins. The brain stayed functional, but less forgiving, less flexible, less resilient. You feel the calm irony of that settle in. Sleep doesn't fail loudly, it fails quietly. Another layer emerges. Wearables also revealed individual differences. Some astronauts adapted faster. Their heart rate stabilized. Their sleep consolidated sooner. Others struggled longer. The same environment, the same schedule. Different outcomes. Sleep, it turns out, is deeply personal. Even in the most standardized setting humans have ever built. NASA took note. Future missions won't rely on one-size-fits-all sleep plans. Personalized schedules, lighting, and workload adjustments are already being tested. The wearable data makes that possible. Sleep becomes something tuned, not imposed. You let that idea drift gently. There's something comforting about it. The recognition that rest isn't about discipline, it's about fit. Another trio of gentle jokes floats through like soft telemetry beeps. Space wearables don't care about excuses. Even your wrist knows when you're tired. And yes, the sleep score still judges silently. There's also the question of long-term memory. Wearable data allowed researchers to see patterns across weeks and months. Sleep debt didn't always appear immediately. Sometimes it accumulated quietly, then expressed itself as mood shifts or slowed cognition later. Sleep in space behaved less like a nightly event and more like a slow-moving balance sheet. NASA researchers began to suspect that sleep might act as an early warning system for deeper misalignments between humans and their environment. When sleep wobbles, something else often follows: stress, isolation, fatigue. Sleep is the canary, and wearables are the cage door left open just enough to notice. You don't feel watched right now, that's important. The story isn't monitoring you, it's pacing itself to match your breathing, your stillness. The difference matters, but you can appreciate the quiet elegance of the science. Tiny sensors, massive implications, sleep reduced to signals, then rebuilt into understanding. Historians still argue whether future generations will see this era as the beginning of true human self-knowledge or simply the dawn of constant measurement. In space, at least, the intent is clear. Data serves care. Understanding supports rest. Another subtle connection hums beneath it all. Wearables measure time continuously: heartbeats, intervals, variability. They turn the body into a clock of sorts. In space, where time itself behaves differently, These biological clocks offer a counterpoint, a grounded rhythm inside an ungrounded environment. NASA watches those rhythms closely. When they drift too far, interventions follow. Light shifts, schedule tweaks, rest periods enforced. Sleep becomes protected, almost sacred. You notice how safe that word feels. Protected. Your sleep right now needs no protection. It's already held gently by familiarity, gravity, darkness, stillness. As this section eases toward its close, the wearables fade back into the background, not as surveillance but as guardians. Quiet, patient, non-judgmental. Tools that remind NASA of something humans have always known, even without devices. Sleep tells the truth about the body, about time, about how well you're really adapting. You don't need a wristband to feel that tonight. Your body already knows how to listen to itself. So let the data stay in orbit. Let the sensors keep watch elsewhere. Here now, there's nothing to track. Just rest. You move onward without noticing the movement, as if the story has stopped advancing through space and started rotating gently in place. Everything feels oriented differently now, not up or down, not before or after, but toward something quietly purposeful. This is where dreaming stops being just a byproduct of sleep and starts to feel like a tool. Because here, the idea takes shape that dreams might be doing more than entertaining you while the body rests. They might be helping you navigate time itself. Here's the mainstream fact anchoring you softly. Neuroscientists broadly agree that dreaming, especially during REM sleep, plays a role in emotional regulation, memory integration, and problem solving. Dreams draw from recent experiences, recombine them, and test possibilities in a low-risk environment. This has been demonstrated repeatedly in lab studies and cognitive research on Earth. NASA researchers, listening carefully to astronauts' dream reports and sleep data, began to wonder whether that same function takes on added importance in space. When your waking environment defies intuition, no gravity, warped time cues, unfamiliar motion, your brain needs new internal maps. Dreams may help sketch them. You imagine the dreaming mind as a quiet navigator, spreading out star charts made of memory and sensation. Not literal stars, but impressions, movements, emotions, the feeling of floating, the view of Earth at night. Dreams take these fragments and arrange them into something the brain can live with. Here's a quirky tidbit that sits just on the edge of science and wonder. Some astronauts report that after particularly vivid dreams, their sense of spatial orientation feels more natural the next day. There's no official metric for this, but the anecdotal pattern is intriguing, as if the dreaming brain practiced overnight. As you smile faintly as the first joke drifts by. Turns out your brain runs simulations while you sleep. No software update required. The second follows, astronauts dream in zero-G, but still wake up late. And the third arrives softly. Even in space, your mind insists on rehearsal. Dreams are famously strange, but they're not random. They pull from memory, emotion, and expectation. On Earth, that often means social situations, fears, desires. In space, the pool of experience changes. The brain draws from floating, rotating, vastness, isolation, beauty. Dreams adjust their content accordingly. NASA doesn't officially call dreams a navigation system. Scientists are cautious with metaphors. Still, the idea surfaces again and again in private discussions and speculative papers. When the external world loses familiar structure, the brain compensates internally. Dreaming may be one way it maintains orientation, not just in space, but in time. Historians still argue whether dreams should be understood primarily as evolutionary adaptations or as creative byproducts of complex brains. Spaceflight adds fuel to that debate. If dreams help humans adapt to radically new environments, their role may be more functional than we once believed. You let that thought settle without trying to define it. Tonight isn't about definitions. It's about direction and the relief of not needing one. There's another layer to this idea. Dreams often bend time. Events from years apart blend together. The past intrudes on the present. The future appears as metaphor. In waking life, this would be disorienting. In dreams, it's normal, comfortable even. In space, where astronauts already experience subtle physical time dilation and fractured day-night cycles, This dreamtime flexibility may serve as practice. The brain rehearses living without a rigid timeline, making waking life feel less jarring by comparison. You notice how your own sense of time feels right now. Soft, forgiving. The story isn't pulling you forward, it's letting you hover. NASA researchers have also noticed that astronauts who report richer dream recall sometimes show better emotional resilience during missions. This isn't a rule, and it's not deterministic, but the correlation is there often enough to be interesting. Dreams may help process stress that has nowhere else to go. Here comes another gentle trio of jokes, drifting like slow telemetry pings. Dreams are the brain's night shift. Uneven astronauts can't escape subconscious symbolism, and apparently floating through space still doesn't stop you from dreaming about Earth food. Dreams also help integrate memory. On Earth, this means learning and emotional experiences. In space, memory integration includes an entirely new category, altered physics. The brain must reconcile what it knows with what it experiences. Dreams may be where that reconciliation happens quietly. NASA hasn't built dream training modules. No one is instructing astronauts to dream better. But sleep schedules that protect REM are increasingly prioritized precisely because REM is where dreaming thrives. The agency doesn't need to explain dreams to value their function. You feel the calm logic of that settle in. Not everything needs a label to be useful. Another observation emerges from post-mission interviews. Astronauts often say that their dreams gradually return to Earth-like content after coming home, but not immediately. There's a lag, as if the dreaming mind takes time to recalibrate. The dream world lingers in orbit even after the body returns. Historians still argue whether this lingering effect reflects psychological adaptation or neurological inertia. Either way, it reinforces the idea that dreams track environment closely. They are not sealed off from reality. They respond to it. You might notice how safe that feels. Dreams responding, adjusting, helping, not something to control, something to trust. As this section eases toward its close, the metaphor of navigation softens into something simpler. Dreams don't give directions. They don't point to destinations. They help the mind feel oriented enough to rest. In space, that orientation may be literal. Up, down, motion, stillness. On Earth, it's emotional, temporal, existential. Dreams help you remember who you are when the world feels strange. Tonight, your world is not strange. It's familiar, quiet, stable. Your dreams don't need to work very hard, but they'll still show up, still rehearse, still wander gently through time without asking permission. And as the story drifts onward, you can let them do what they do best. Guide without steering, explore without effort, and remind the mind that it knows how to find its way. Even in the dark, even without gravity, you don't feel a jolt or a jump as the story continues. It's more like the sensation of opening your eyes briefly in the night and realizing you still don't need to wake up. When everything remains slow, padded, forgiving. And now something familiar slips in. Something you've almost certainly experienced yourself, just on a much smaller, more terrestrial scale. Jet lag. Here's the mainstream fact grounding you gently. Jet lag occurs when your circadian rhythm becomes misaligned with local time, typically after rapid travel across time zones. Symptoms include poor sleep, fatigue, difficulty concentrating, and mood changes. This is well documented in sleep medicine and affects millions of people every year on Earth. Now you quietly scale that up. Astronauts don't cross a few time zones. They leave the planet entirely. Their bodies are asked to reconcile an internal clock evolved for Earth with an environment where sunrise happens 16 times a day, gravity disappears, and clocks must be imposed rather than observed. Jet lag in space becomes something much stranger, almost relativistic. You imagine the feeling of ordinary jet lag, waking at 3 a.m., wide awake, hunger arriving at odd hours, dreams spilling into the wrong parts of the night. Disorienting but temporary. Now imagine that state stretched out over weeks or months, layered with microgravity and altered light. That's the challenge NASA faces. Here's a quirky tidbit that feels oddly grounding. Astronauts sometimes describe the first days in orbit as feeling like permanent jet lag without the airplane. No turbulence, no seatbelt sign, just the lingering sense that the body clock has missed an important memo. You smile faintly as the first joke drifts by. Jet lag, but make it orbital. The second follows. Turns out you can outrun the sun. Yes, but not your circadian rhythm. And the third arrives softly. Even in space, your body still thinks it knows what time it is. NASA researchers began treating sleep disruption in orbit as an extreme model of jet lag, one that reveals how flexible or inflexible human timekeeping really is. Unlike travelers on Earth, astronauts can't rely on gradual adjustment to local sunrise. There is no local sunrise in the usual sense. Time must be declared. Mission schedules assign days and nights. Lights turn on and off. Work blocks are defined. Sleep periods are protected. All of it is designed to give the brain something to hold on to. But as wearable data and sleep logs showed, the internal clock doesn't always cooperate. Historians still argue whether the concept of time zones was one of humanity's most elegant compromises or one of its most stressful inventions. Spaceflight pushes that compromise to its limits. When time becomes fully artificial, sleep becomes the first system to protest. Another layer drifts into view. On Earth, jet lag eventually resolves because environmental cues realign. Morning light, social schedules, meals. In space, those cues are weaker or simulated. Adaptation happens, but it's slower and sometimes incomplete. Some astronauts report that their circadian rhythms never fully settle during shorter missions. You feel how gently the story holds that complexity. No alarm, no urgency. Just the quiet acknowledgement that the body prefers gradual change, and space offers none. There's also the return journey. Our astronauts don't just experience jet lag going up, they experience it coming home. After months of imposed schedules and artificial light, Earth's natural day-night cycle can feel overwhelming at first. Sleep often deepens dramatically, then fluctuates as the circadian system reasserts itself. NASA tracks this carefully. Post-mission sleep studies show that readaptation can take weeks. Dreams intensify. REM rebounds. The brain seems to take extra time integrating the experience of living outside Earth's time. Historians still argue whether this re-entry phase has been underestimated psychologically. The body comes home quickly. The clock takes its time. You let that idea drift by like everything else tonight. You're not changing time zones. You're not orbiting anything. Your internal clock knows exactly where it is, and it's quietly winding down. Another trio of gentle jokes floats through like soft turbulence. Astronauts don't collect frequent flyer miles. Space has terrible layovers, and jet lag is the only thing that travels faster than rockets. There's a deeper implication here, one that NASA rarely states outright. Jet lag reveals that your sense of time is negotiable, not fixed. Spaceflight proves it. Sleep is the medium through which that negotiation happens. When the clock shifts too fast, sleep becomes strained. When sleep is protected, adaptation follows. In a way, jet lag is a small, everyday demonstration of the same principle astronauts live with. Your body keeps time biologically. The world keeps time socially. When they disagree, sleep feels it first. And you notice how calm that realization feels when there's nothing you need to do about it? No alarm waiting, no flight to catch. Just the luxury of alignment. As this section eases toward quiet, the metaphor softens. Space isn't just an extreme environment, it's a mirror. It exaggerates what already happens on Earth, making invisible processes visible. Jet lag becomes a window into how deeply sleep is tied to time itself. And tonight, your window is closed. The room is still. The clock agrees with your body. There's nowhere to travel now. No sunrise to chase. No orbit to complete. Just the gentle easing of awareness as time finally stops asking you to keep up. You don't notice yourself arriving here. The story simply grows warmer, steadier, like a hand placed gently on your back. After all the bending of time, the drifting clocks, the fragmented nights, something surprisingly tender comes into focus. Healing. Because NASA didn't just wonder how sleep changes in space, they began asking whether sleep could protect astronauts from the very distortions space introduces. Here's the mainstream fact grounding you softly. Sleep is essential for physical repair, immune function, cognitive performance, and emotional regulation. This is not debated science. On Earth, inadequate sleep slows wound healing, weakens immunity, and impairs decision-making. In space, where the body is already under unusual stress, sleep becomes even more critical. Astronauts experience muscle loss, bone density reduction, fluid shifts, and heightened radiation exposure. Their bodies work harder just to maintain baseline function. NASA researchers realized early on that if sleep falters under these conditions, recovery falters with it. Rest isn't optional in space. It's countermeasure number one. You imagine the body at night, quietly repairing itself, cells dividing, proteins folding, hormones pulsing in precise rhythms. Sleep is when the body stops spending energy on reacting and starts investing energy in rebuilding. In space, where time cues blur and gravity loosens its grip, this rebuilding still happens. But it needs protection. Here's a quirky tidbit that feels oddly comforting. Astronauts are sometimes encouraged to think of sleep as a form of medicine. Not metaphorically, practically. Mission planners will adjust workloads, lighting, and even experiment schedules if sleep debt begins to accumulate. Sleep is treated less like downtime and more like treatment. Aku smile faintly as the first joke drifts by. Sleep, the only medicine you're not allowed to skip in space. The second follows. Turns out the best recovery tech doesn't require batteries. And the third arrives softly. Even astronauts can't push through a bad night forever. NASA studies show that when astronauts manage to maintain consistent, protected sleep, even if it's shorter than ideal, their bodies cope better with microgravity's effects. Muscle loss slows, cognitive performance stabilizes, mood evens out. Sleep doesn't eliminate space stress, but it buffers it. There's a deeper layer here, one that brushes against space-time again. Healing is a process that unfolds over time. Tissue repair, memory consolidation, emotional processing, all depend on temporal sequences. When time perception wobbles, healing can wobble too. Sleep may act as a stabilizer, giving the body a reliable internal timeline even when the external one feels strange. Historians still argue whether early space medicine underestimated sleep because its benefits were diffuse and slow, while other interventions felt more immediate. It's easy to measure a pill, harder to measure a good night's rest. Spaceflight forced a recalibration. Over time, sleep earned its place as a primary health variable. NASA has experimented with strategic naps, sleep extension protocols, and carefully timed recovery periods. They've learned that sleep doesn't just restore what's lost, it prevents loss from happening in the first place. A well-rested astronaut adapts more smoothly. A sleep-deprived one accumulates stress invisibly until something gives. You feel how reassuring that is. Sleep is prevention. Sleep is armor. Another observation quietly emerges. Astronauts who maintain better sleep patterns often report feeling more emotionally resilient, less reactive, more patient. Space is isolating. Earth is far away. Small frustrations can grow large. Sleep smooths those edges. It keeps emotions from stretching too thin across long missions. NASA researchers have also noticed that sleep appears to interact with radiation exposure in subtle ways. While sleep doesn't block radiation, it supports cellular repair mechanisms that respond to DNA damage. It's not a shield, but it's maintenance. The body's way of saying, I can fix this, given time. And time, once again, is the quiet theme. Sleep gives the body time it can use productively, not measured in clocks or schedules, but in cycles of repair. In space, where time itself behaves oddly, Wahi's sleep offers a familiar rhythm the body recognizes. A nightly return to something dependable. You let that idea rest beside you. You don't need to heal anything dramatic tonight, but your body is still doing its quiet work. Clearing waste from the brain, resetting stress hormones, balancing systems you never consciously manage. Another trio of gentle jokes floats through like soft static. Sleep. Now with added cosmic importance, astronauts lift weights in space but still need naps. And the most advanced recovery protocol ever invented is still closing your eyes. NASA's long-term plans, missions to Mars, extended lunar stays, place even greater emphasis on sleep. Months or years away from Earth will strain the body in new ways. Exercise, nutrition, and shielding matter. But sleep may be the foundation everything else rests on. When you notice how the story itself has slowed further here, sentences stretch, pauses lengthen. That's intentional. Talking about healing invites stillness. It signals safety. Historians still argue whether humans evolved sleep primarily for energy conservation, neural maintenance, or immune defense. Space research suggests the answer might be all of the above. Sleep isn't one thing, it's a convergence point, a place where many forms of healing overlap. In space, that overlap becomes visible. When sleep slips, multiple systems complain at once. When sleep is protected, many systems quietly cooperate. You feel your breathing deepen, your body heavier, more settled. That's the signal. Healing doesn't announce itself. It happens quietly in the background when conditions feel right. West NASA continues to refine sleep protocols not because sleep is mysterious, but because it's powerful. It's the one intervention that touches everything: mind, body, perception, time. And tonight, you don't need microgravity or mission planners to benefit from that power. You already have what astronauts chase with schedules and LEDs. Darkness, stillness, enough time. As this section eases toward its close, the idea lingers gently. Sleep is how the body heals through time, even when time itself feels unreliable. You are not repairing for a mission. You are not adapting to orbit. You are simply resting. And that, it turns out, is one of the most effective healing states a human can enter, on Earth or anywhere else in the universe. You don't feel a build toward a climax here. There's no swell of music, no tightening of ideas. Instead, everything grows quieter, simpler, as if the story itself knows it's nearly time to let go. What remains now is the future, not sharp or urgent, but softly outlined. This is where NASA looks ahead, speaking in careful tones about what comes next and what sleep will have to do with it. Here's the mainstream fact grounding you gently. NASA is actively designing future missions, back to the moon, onward to Mars, with sleep as a central consideration. This isn't an afterthought. Sleep science is now integrated into spacecraft design, mission timelines, lighting systems, and crew health protocols. Rest has become infrastructure. You imagine a future spacecraft not just as a machine for travel, but as a moving night environment. Controlled light that mimics dawn and dusk, quiet zones protected from constant noise. On schedules that bend around human biology instead of forcing biology to bend around schedules. It's a subtle shift in philosophy, but a profound one. NASA has learned, slowly and carefully, that you can't brute force the human nervous system. You can't out-discipline circadian rhythms or outwork sleep debt. Space taught that lesson early, and it taught it repeatedly. The future of exploration depends not just on propulsion, but on rest. Here's a quirky tidbit that feels oddly hopeful. Some proposed spacecraft designs include dedicated sleep modules with adjustable lighting, temperature, and even gentle vibration to simulate a sense of grounding. Nothing dramatic, just enough sensory familiarity to help the brain relax, a technological lullaby. You smile faintly as the first joke drifts by. The future of spaceflight includes better bedrooms. The second follows. Mars is far away, but bedtime still comes first, and the third arrives softly. Turns out the most advanced feature on a spaceship might be the light switch. NASA also talks carefully about time. A mission to Mars won't follow a 24-hour Earth day. Mars has a slightly longer day, about 24 hours and 39 minutes. That difference sounds small, but over months it adds up. Sleep schedules will need to stretch, adapt, and realign. The human clock will once again be asked to negotiate. Historians still argue whether humans are fundamentally earthbound creatures or whether adaptability is our defining trait. NASA's plans suggest a cautious optimism. Humans can adapt, but only if sleep is protected. Only if the brain is given time to recalibrate. There's also the psychological future to consider. Isolation, distance, communication delays. Astronauts on Mars won't see Earth as a glowing marble outside their window. It will be a bright star, barely distinguishable from the rest. Sleep, dreams, and internal timekeeping may become even more important as anchors of identity. NASA researchers are beginning to ask new questions. Can sleep schedules be personalized in deep space? Can dream reports offer early warnings of psychological strain? Can changes in sleep architecture signal when a crew member needs intervention before problems surface? You let those questions float by without weight. They're not for you to answer. They're part of a future unfolding slowly, deliberately, when another trio of gentle jokes drifts through like distant radio chatter. Astronauts will still complain about sleep. Future missions will include do not disturb signs, and even on Mars, someone will hit snooze. There's also humility in NASA's forward-looking tone. Despite all the data, all the sensors, all the planning, sleep remains partly mysterious. You can support it, protect it, encourage it, but you can't command it. The future of space exploration accepts that truth rather than fighting it. Sleep becomes a partner rather than an obstacle, something to listen to, not override. You feel how well that philosophy fits the night you're in now. You're not forcing anything, not chasing rest, just allowing it. NASA's future plans also echo something ancient. As humans venture farther from Earth, they circle back to the basics. Light, or darkness, rhythm, safety. The same ingredients that helped early humans sleep under open skies now guide engineers designing habitats on distant worlds. Historians still argue whether progress is best measured by how far we travel or by how well we preserve what makes us human along the way. NASA's attention to sleep suggests an answer leaning gently toward the latter. The future doesn't roar, it whispers. And as this section eases toward its close, the sense of looking ahead softens into something more immediate. You don't need to worry about Mars, or missions, or time dilation. Tonight, the future can wait. NASA will keep planning. Scientists will keep measuring. Astronauts will keep adapting. You don't need to. Your only task now is rest. The lights are already low. The schedule is already kind. When time is no longer asking anything of you. And with that, the future drifts out of focus, leaving behind the most reliable technology humanity has ever had for surviving strange worlds. Sleep. You don't arrive at the end of the story so much as you settle into it. Everything that once felt expansive, space stations, time dilation, cosmic particles, has gently folded inward, becoming small enough to rest beside you without effort. This final stretch isn't about discovery, it's about return. Return to the body, return to the room, return to the quiet certainty that you are exactly where you're meant to be. Here's the simple mainstream fact grounding you one last time. Sleep on Earth remains more stable, deeper, and more restorative than sleep in space for most humans. Gravity, consistent light cycles, atmospheric shielding, and familiar sensory cues all work together to support rest. After everything NASA has learned, this truth stands calmly at the center. You imagine an astronaut drifting back toward Earth, capsule glowing softly, gravity slowly reasserting itself. The body feels heavier. Muscles remember their old jobs. Blood settles back into familiar paths. And sleep, deep, grounded sleep, returns with a kind of gratitude. Astronauts often describe their first nights back on Earth as profoundly restful. Heavier dreams, longer stretches of unbroken sleep, a sense of being held rather than suspended. Gravity becomes a comfort rather than a constraint. Here's a quirky tidbit that feels almost tender. Some astronauts say they don't remember their first Earth night dreams at all, only the feeling of sinking into sleep and staying there. No floating, no flashes. Just rest. You smile softly as the final trio of jokes drifts through. Barely audible now. Turns out down is underrated. Earth has excellent sleep support, and gravity once again wins Employee of the Month. NASA's long arc of research, spanning decades, missions, mice, wearables, and whispered questions, doesn't end with a dramatic revelation. It ends with appreciation. Appreciation for how finely tuned the human body is to this planet. How much of what feels ordinary is actually extraordinary. Sleep, it turns out, is not just something you do at the end of the day. It's how you stay aligned with time, with biology, with the environment that shaped you. Historians still argue whether humanity's future lies among the stars or firmly rooted on Earth. NASA's sleep research doesn't settle that debate, but it offers a quiet reminder. Wherever humans go, they will carry their need for rest with them. And rest always, will ask for rhythm, safety, and time. You feel those things now. The story no longer needs to carry you. Your breathing does that on its own. The room has faded to a soft outline. Thoughts have thinned into gentle impressions that don't ask to be followed. Space-time can bend elsewhere. Clocks can tick for someone else. The universe can continue expanding without your attention. Right now, nothing is required of you. You are not measuring. You are not adapting. You are not exploring. You are resting. And maybe that's the quietest connection of all. One NASA didn't need to announce, because you already live it every night. That sleep is the place where humans stop trying to master time and simply exist within it. No equations, no schedules, no orbit to maintain. Just this moment, stretched comfortably wide, gently closing in on itself. The story loosens its grip. The voice fades to a whisper. The last thought drifts out like a distant star dimming at dawn. You don't need to follow it. Sleep has you now.